Fans of the Horus Heresy, thank you very much for joining me for a video where I'm going to talk to you about, well, the Horus Heresy itself. So I'm doing this in response to a number of questions and requests I've had from you guys over, well, the time I've been leaky cheesing on YouTube. And the question goes something like this: please could you do as a video giving us an introduction to what the Horus Heresy is as a game and what it's all about. I'm going to try address that in this video, and I'm doing this to kind of like, I'll give you a flavour of what it is as a game. I mean, the Horus Heresy, it's a supplement to Warhammer 40,000 produced by Forge World. From my point of view, I really enjoy the Horus Heresy era, both from a point of view of the gaming itself, you know, so the Warhammer 40,000 tabletop war game, but I also really enjoy it from all the background and the history that has come along with it. You know, so that's my perspective, you know, and I've a lot of my hobby money into this over the last few years, bought a lot of books and a lot of models as well, so I guess I've gamed it quite a lot as well, so hopefully I've got a decent amount of experience to share a perspective with you all, and yeah, so I hope you're going to find this useful. So, okay, what's the structure of this video going to be? I'm going to break this down into a number of sections to kind of take you through this, and this is going to be as follows. So firstly, I'm going to give you an introduction, so I'm going to talk a bit about what the heresy is. Then I'm going to talk about the setting of the heresy, and this is the in-game lore setting of when the Horus Heresy is, because this is a very different universe to Warhammer 40,000 that you may be accustomed to playing, and certainly most, you know, a lot of people know the game of 40k through the, well, present day, shall we say, 40k 41st millennium history setting. So I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to then talk about resources and books. So, well, the books are the Forge World publications that support this game, both from a point of view of the story and army lists. The other part of resources, of course, is miniatures as well, and there are some very large ranges of miniatures that support this game. I'm then going to talk a bit about the game style. So in other words, if you are interested in the Horus Heresy as a tabletop war game, I'm going to talk a little bit about what the game is like to play, because it is, while it has a common rule set with Warhammer 40,000, it is a very different game. I'm going to draw some of those comparisons out, hopefully to kind of give you a feel for what it's like. Then finally, I'm just going to sort of wrap all this up by saying, well, if it's something that you are interested in getting into, you know, where to start, because there's a bewildering array of products available. You know, I've got a few thoughts to share with you on that, both in terms of, well, what is a good place to start, and also thinking, what are some low-cost ways into looking at the heresy, because, you know, the products are not cheap, so it's useful to think about low-cost ways of getting into it, because, you know, you might buy a load of stuff and play it or read it and then find you don't like it. So yeah, I'm going to try and address that as well for you guys. That's the structure. So let's go back up to the top and start with the introduction. Okay, so the Horus Heresy is a supplement for the Warhammer 40,000 game by Games Workshop, and Forge World produces this supplement. So Forge World is the offshoot company of GW that specialises in, well, predominantly resin models and rules and source material to support those. I'm not going to talk about the game of 40k in this video. I'm going to assume you know something about it, although, you know, you can still watch this video if you don't. I will leave a link in the description to a video I posted earlier where I talk about 40k from a point of view of a game design and philosophy viewpoint, so that may be something interesting to look at if you're not familiar with 40k. So yeah, so as I say, the whole of the Heresy is owned by Forge World, and that's interesting because it has allowed the game to develop into something quite different to the mainstream 40k or 41st millennium Warhammer 40,000. As well as all the Forge World products, there's an absolutely enormous array of books that are produced by the Black Library, or Warhammer Digital, whatever they're choosing to call themselves these days. Games Workshop's novel department. That's what it boils down to. There's an enormous array of books there. So I guess another part to the heresy is just the story side, and, you know, it's not just, you know, there's the gaming, the miniature collecting, but there's also this enormous history and story, and that's something in itself, and you know, people just like it for the story, so that's another aspect of this. Although I'm not going to talk about the Black Library books, they are something that is there. But in terms of what Forge will produce, the resources, well, you can see there's a number of books in the background. These are what I generally call the black books, and these are the source materials. 7 of these have been released so far. And then these are also supported by army and faction books, which are smaller publications. In terms of the miniatures, well, the vast majority of the range is produced by Forge World as in resin kit form. There is an absolutely enormous range of Forge World models available to support the Horus Heresy, and indeed the Horus Heresy has been an absolute boon to the Forge World part of the GW business as I see it, and their product line has expanded enormously since I think the Horus Heresy, was it 2011, 2012? But since it was released, their product line has expanded enormously. However, that things are now moving a bit, which from a point of view of cost is an important thing, because Games Workshop are starting to introduce some of their skills in the plastic size of things, and there are some options there as well. So yeah, in a nutshell, Horus Heresy is a Forge World supplement to 40k. They do most of the models, but there are some bits from GW. So let's now talk about the setting to the Horus Heresy. So the Horus Heresy is set in the 31st millennium, so 10,000 years before the present timeline in Warhammer 40,000, and it is set at the time of the Great Crusade, and specifically it's set right at the end of the Great Crusade, and it chronicles the events of the Horus Heresy, which was the galaxy-spanning civil war whereby Horus Lupercal, the favoured Primarch of the Emperor, turned against him, split the legions down the middle, split the Mechanicum, split the Imperium, and there was this devastating civil war. That is the main plot. It's set at a time when the Imperium was at the height of its power. The Emperor walked as a mortal man, shall we say, or a mortal being, and of course all the Primarchs were there as well. So yes, it's a very different time. Technology was at a higher level of attainment than is present in Warhammer 40,000. Which, 40k represents the Imperium post Horus Heresy, which it recovered and survived, but it never achieved the same sort of technological greatness of the Great Crusade era. The Horus Heresy itself lasts around 10 years. The 7 books that have been published so far cover quite a wide part of that. We don't yet know how big this whole series is going to be. There's been all sorts of speculation around that. I kind of imagine it going to at least a dozen books, and who knows, it may take it even further. However, as well as the actual Horus Heresy itself, you're given a whole game setting that allows you to play battles in the age of the Great Crusade. So there are a number of armies available that allow you to do, say, human planets that have been reconquered in the Great Crusade, and then by using a little bit of originality, you could fight Eldar, you could fight Orcs, etc., etc. A variety of 40k era protagonists that you could also introduce into 30k to represent battles of the Great Crusade. So we've got this intergalactic civil war, the Horus Heresy. On one side you've got the loyalists with the Emperor and the traitors with Horus, but there's a whole host of factions that Forge World has created background miniatures and army lists for, and I'm just going to run through these one by one. So the first is Legions Astartes. So the Adeptus Astartes are Space Marines. With the first book of Horus Heresy, which was book 1, Betrayal, it was all about the legions, and that's really where it started. There are 18 Space Marine legions? Can't remember now, so you'll have to correct me in the comments. Space Marines are the Emperor's spearhead force of imperial conquest to reconquer human civilization. So, those are the guys, and those are our classic Space Marines, however, presented in a very different incarnation to what we know in 40k. The next force, and I'm going to list these chronologically in the order they were introduced by Forge World. The next force is the Mechanicum. Now, the Mechanicum is the ancestor of what in 40k is known as the Adeptus Mechanicus. They are also the ancestor to the Dark Mechanicum as well, or Dark Mechanicus. And the Mechanicum represent the forces of the tech priests of Mars and the Forge Worlds they created and unified as well. So yes, that's the Mechanicum. And of course, the Mechanicum came along in the Horus Heresy series, particularly in books 2 and 3, and they seem to me to be the direct inspiration to the appearance of the Skitari and the Cult Mechanicus in the Warhammer 40,000 game, which Games Workshop introduced. There are 3 flavours of the Mechanicum, which all are fluff rich. The first is what's called the Tagmata, or the Tagmata Omnissiah. Forces of the Mechanicum, which are they're structured a bit like the Byzantine Empire. The next and they are the defenders and standing armies or temporarily mustered armies of the Forge Worlds. The next force is the Legio Cybernetica, and the Legio Cybernetica are a highly militant faction and highly divided faction, which are the users of the battle automata, so the battle robots. The third faction is the Ordo Reductor, again a highly militant faction, and the Ordo Reductor specialise in the art of siege warfare. That is a mechanicum. The next force is called the Solar Auxilia. The Solar Auxilia represent what we might almost imagine to be the second tier of Imperial Crusade forces. So the Legions Astartes are the tip of the spear. However, the Solar Auxilia are the spear head, shall we say. Essentially, the Solar Auxilia are like the Imperial Guard, but turned up to 10, or turned up to 11 even. So they're very high quality Imperial Guard, vehicle heavy, good quality troops. And the Solar Auxilia don't have a comparator in the 41st millennium. I mean, you could say the Tempestus Scions, or the Stormtroopers as they used to be called, are similar, but the Solar Auxilia are much more than they are. The next force you can do are the Knight Houses, or the Questorus Knights, and this is very much like 40k. These are your Knight Titan forces, so yes, go if you want to play lots of super heavies all in one legit force. These are the guys to go for. These are the various houses, both in terms of the noble knight houses, some of which are affiliated to the Titan legions, but also those indentured houses of the Mechanicum. The next force represented is a militia list, and also the associated traitorous cults. Now, if the Space Marines are the tip of the spear and the Solar Auxilia is the spearhead, then these guys are almost like the haft of the spear. The militia and the militia is the enormous force that represents the enormous standing forces of the Imperium, so the planetary garrisons. These are much lower quality troops than the other two forces. However, the way the army is structured, you get an enormous variety of options to customize these, and you can create anything from super dirt cheap troops to what are called the survivors of the dark age of technology, which are actually superior to the Solar Auxilia in many regards. In almost entirely, so actually very high quality troops, almost moving into the sort of Space Marine territory of quality. So the militia list gives you a huge amount of variety there, and if you're wanting to play that Great Crusade era, the militia list is a great way of introducing human planetary forces who are resisting the Great Crusade. Another part of the militia list is what's called the cult list, and after the initiation of the heresy, Horus and his forces and Lorgar and the Wordbearers was particularly instrumental in this, created cultist forces to support them, and the cult list does that. So this introduces some slightly chaotic elements, so you can even have, for example, Chaos Spawn as part of the cult list. So that's another element and another variety of the militia list. And you could also equally use a cult army as part of the Great Crusade opposition style approach. The next army that you can play is what's called the Shattered Legions, and the Shattered Legions represents the fragments of Space Marine legions following the disaster of the drop site massacre on Isfahan 5 at the start of the heresy. And so basically these are this allows you to take lots of different parts of individual legions and combine them into a single whole. From a historical or a story point of view, it would initially apply to loyalist survivors first, but you can equally use it to make up traitor legions as well. So that allows you to mix and match your legions into single forces. The final flavour of Space Marines that are currently available is what's called the Black Shields, and this represents a further evolution, shall we say, of the Shattered Legions, and the Black Shields are Space Marine troops that have abandoned all pretense of their original legionary allegiance, and they now just fight exactly as the name suggests under a black banner, so no banner. They fight for themselves, and these people could be anything from de facto loyalists to de facto traitors to completely independent renegades. An enormous variety of options with your Space Marines there. And then the final force, which has just been released this year with Book 7, is what's called the Talons of the Emperor, and this is a very exciting development in the game because here we have the Adeptus Custodes and the Sisters of Silence, two very interesting forces from the lore that we've not yet seen and have now been introduced, with a fully developed army list that combines the Custodians and the Sisters of Silence into a single cohesive force. Those are the protagonist factions for the Horus Heresy. you are playing in the age of the Great Crusade, and you have all of the troops that entails. Clearly, it's very human-centric, so we don't have lots of alien races in here. This is all about the Imperium of Man. That is a focus thus far. So let's move on to talking about the books. So what books would you want? So I suppose there's two ways of approaching Horus Heresy. The first is as someone who is interested in the lore, and I'll deal with that first. And if you're interested in the background and the history, then the books to go for are what are called the Black Books, and these are the large full-size publications. There's 7 books. Book 1, Betrayal. Book 2, Massacre. Book 3, Extermination. Book 4, Conquest. Book 5, Tempest. Book 6, Retribution. And finally, Book 7, Inferno. And they all deal with a particular part of the heresy. And they're a mixture of history, campaigns, and rules. But there's a lot of history, and they probably tend to be at least 50% history, maybe up to 2/3 history. So if you're interested in it from just the point of view of the story, then from a point of view of, and the way these are all written as sort of like history written shortly after the heresy, so they're kind of they're looking back, but they're written in a really good way, and the historical perspectives are much closer to the events than anything in 40k that's preceded these, and there's an awful lot of depth presented as well. And it's one thing that I really like about the whole Horus Heresy thing is the way the background books are written, and it's a very different style of writing to the present Warhammer 40,000 writing, which the present Warhammer 40,000 writing has gone very sort of heroic style, I always think. These guys are more measured, balanced, historical. They're more like accounts of what has happened. And if you're familiar with any other Forge War books, I'm sure these will ring true as well. So if you read anything like the Badab Wars, it's the same sort of writing style, because of course you've got the same writing team producing them as well. So that's kind of like the background bit. If you wanted to game it though, then as well as these guys, which introduce rules and factions, you also have what I call, if we call those the Black Books, we also have what I will call the Red Books. And the Red Books are army lists and forces as well. And then the third thing you're going to need if you're gaming, or the other thing you're going to need if you're gaming, is a copy of the Warhammer 40,000 core rulebook. So this is 7th edition, which probably soon to be obsolete at the time of recording this video, so you'll want that as well. So the Black Books, let me just quickly run over those. So you've got Book 1, Betrayal, that deals with the Isfahan 3 massacre. Book 2, Massacre, which deals with Isfahan 5 drop site massacre. Book 3, Extermination, deals with the first battles of Horus's expansion and civil war. Book 4, Conquest, which deals with the conflict widening further and more parts of the Imperium being pulled into it. Book 5, Tempest, deals with the events around the Battle of Calth. Book 6, Retribution, deals with what the heresy bogged down into, shall we say, and the wider war across the whole Imperium. And finally, we've got Book 7, Inferno, which kind of actually is a prequel to Book 1, and that actually takes us back to before Isfahan 3 and deals with the events of the burning of Prospero. I've done detailed book reviews of all 7 Black Books, and I will leave you a playlist link if you're interested in checking out those reviews in the description. Right. So those are your Black Books, and they are the story and the rules. Now, Forge World has also produced a set of books which kind of condense the gameplay elements of that down. So if you're just interested in the gaming part of it, you can buy these books, and coupled with your 40k rules, you're good to go. So, first book, again, starting from the top, we've got what's called the Legions Astartes Age of Darkness Army List. So this is the Space Marine Legion Army List. Now, I called this a Red Book. This is a limited edition copy of a Red Book. Still available, but in the Red Book format. So this Legions Astartes book has a full Space Marine Legion Army List in it. So if you're kind of interested in playing Marines, this is your go-to resource in the first instance. That has everything you need to game the Marines. If you're then interested in adding specialised rules for specific legions, there's a book which is called the campaign legions, and we can see that this is now a red book. Now this book here is actually out of date. This is the Istvan campaign legions book, but this has been re-released as the Age of Darkness legions, and it adds a whole host of additional legions into this book. But that is the red book format that you're looking for if you're buying these. So with those two books, you've got everything you need for your Marines. This book is this guy, and this is the Mechanicum Tagmata Army List. And it's exactly what it says. This is a complete unified Mechanicum list, and it allows you to create forces of the Tagmata, the Legio Cybernetica, and the Ordo Reductor. So that's all in there. There's another red book available, the fourth one in effect, which is the Crusade Imperialis list. And that contains Solar Auxilia, the Militia, the Cults, and then also the Questoris Knight list as well. That's the full gamut of what's available in the red books. At the moment, we don't have a red book for the Talons of the Emperor. That is only currently available in Book 7 Inferno. We shall wait and see. If Forge will stick with the current MO, we will get a red book, I'm sure, at some point, which deals with the Talons. If you're wanting to game only, copy of the 40k rules, plus the relevant army list you're interested in getting into, and then you're good. There's loads and loads of history, campaigns, and other scenarios in those. So if you're wanting to play that sort of game, then that's where those really add value. So that is the books. Now, moving on to the bit that I guess draws a lot of us in, which is the miniatures. The vast majority of the Horus Heresy range is produced by Forge World as resin kits. So to start with, this was a very expensive game to get into because pretty much all the models, if you wanted to have an authentic looking force, and certainly any of the specialised tanks, etc., everything was Forge World. However, Forge World have done a splendid job, an absolutely fantastic job of producing miniatures to support this game. So just about everything in these army list books is available as a miniature. There's a few little bits that isn't, but when you look at the range that's available, it is very impressive. The odd little bits that isn't present, you can convert your way into it. However, obviously that is Forge World, and Forge World, with them being resin models, they are expensive. Up until recently, there wasn't any other way of doing authentic looking armies apart from using standard Games Workshop models and converting them in. However, recently Games Workshop has started producing plastic 30k era models, and there's a few ways of getting those. So the first is in the Betrayal at Calth box set game, and Betrayal at Calth introduced Multipose Mark IV Maximus armor Space Marines. It also gave us Cataphracti pattern Terminator armor, and it gave us a couple of heroes and also a Contemptor Dreadnought, also in plastic. So the Betrayal at Calth game gives you the staples that you want for the Crusade era. The Burning of Prospero box set then expanded this further, and it really added variety into the plastic range. So on the standard Marines front, we see Mark III plastic Space Marines introduced. We get a new variant of Terminator armor, so we get plastic Tartaros pattern Terminator armor. So Tartaros pattern Terminator armor is a pattern of Terminator armor from the era of the Horus Heresy. We then get a couple of heroes again, and probably most significantly, representatives of the Talons of the Emperor. So we get models for the Legio Custodes, so the Custodian Guard, and we also get them for the Sisters of Silence as well. Those two boxed games introduced a really good range of plastic models for building your basic infantry for most of the forces. And these are starting to appear in the mainstream Games Workshop range as individual box sets. So for example, there's a Mark IV box set of Space Marines, plastic Space Marines, Terminator set, the Contemptor Dreadnought. You can now get the Custodian Guard set, you can get the Sisters of Silence. And the plastics are cheaper than like-for-like Forge World models, probably around 60% of the cost of equivalent Forge World models, there or thereabouts, depending on the model. If you're wanting lower cost ways into starting forces, that's a great way of doing it. You can further reduce your cost of getting Heresy era miniatures by looking to independent retailers for these plastic miniatures, and there's some really great bargains to be had on the Betrayal at Calth game and the Burning of Prospero game, where you can get those for UK postage. You can get them around 15 to 18% below recommended retail price. So if you're wanting an inexpensive way, probably inexpensive isn't the right term to use, but the lowest cost way of getting the models with the correct era and armour styles and weapons that's a really good way of doing it, in my opinion. And then finally, you've also got a whole host of what I would call the independent manufacturers of resin and other plastic models. There's a whole host of those. I've covered a few on the channel already, things like Anvil Industries. I looked at Victoria Miniatures from Australia. There's loads and loads out there, and whether they're making resin or plastic models, you can use these miniatures. You may, if you feel strongly about having Space Marines to represent Space Marines, I think the independents are very strong if you're wanting to build individual and interesting looking militia and cult forces. They're very good for that. And I guess finally on the miniatures front, well, the other way to do it is if you've got a 40k force with Space Marines, there are ways of turning a 40k Space Marine army into a Horus Heresy Legion force quite easily. And there are a number of rights of wars in the Space Marine army list that allow you to take 40k style squads. So in other words, a typical 10-man tactical squad with a support weapon and a heavy weapon, and use it as a veteran squad in the Legion setup. So you can do that as well. And there's other ways, there's forces of entire Terminators, for example. Not everything in 40k is compatible back to the Heresy. I mean, certain vehicles such as the Razorback aren't used in the Horus Heresy. Predators with twin-link lance cannon turrets, not in the Heresy. A variety of flyers aren't in the Heresy, so not everything is backwards compatible, but certainly your infantry are. So that's another way of getting into it at a low cost, is to repurpose a Space Marine army for 40k into the Heresy. And likewise, if you've got large guard armies, you could do the same with the Solar Auxilia or the cults. I guess the other thing is for the more specialised forces, so for example the Mechanicum in particular, there's nothing really that compares. It's difficult to find comparators for the model, so you're a bit more limited there for other options apart from going for the Forge World miniatures. Although, ironically, the Mechanicum are actually one of the cheaper forces, although it's not cheap, but they're one of the cheaper forces to buy Forge World models for to start an army. And I guess the Talons of the Emperor sitting somewhere between the two, because we've got plastic miniatures from Games Workshop and then we've got resin models from Forge World. So maybe the Talons of the Emperor is sort of like a new style of force there, where you've got GW doing part and Forge World doing the other part. Anyway, that's the miniatures, and for a lot of us, and certainly for me, the miniatures in the Horus Heresy are brilliant, and a lot of what pulls me in to doing this part of the hobby. Really, really good. And if you explore my channel, there's loads and loads of reviews of various models. I'm sure you'll see why I like them. Right, so that brings me to the final part of this video, which is to talk about game style. So, what is a Horus Heresy like to play? So, obviously it's Warhammer 40,000, however it is different. It has its own version of the game, which is called Battles in the Age of Darkness. So when you play Battles in the Age of Darkness, you're not allowed to use certain 40k armies, and in particular you're not allowed to play unbound forces. The scoring rules work differently in the Horus Heresy, so not everything is a scoring unit. As a matter of fact, you're actually very constrained in the Horus Heresy and to what scores, and normally you can only score with troop choices. You can't score with elites or heavy support. You can contest objectives, but you can't score objectives. So your troop choices in the Horus Heresy are really important from the point of view of objective capture and holding. That's the first thing. The second thing, I guess, is it is designed for larger battles, medium to large battles. In the Black Books, when you look at the scenarios, most of the scenarios are really designed for about 1,750 points as a minimum, typically looking at 2,000 points and upwards, and the army lists have been deliberately scaled to work with these big forces very well. And we see that in the form of a lot of units available in single slots most of the time. So instead of having 10 Space Marines as a troop choice, you can have 20 Space Marines, 20 Assault Marines, 20 Breacher Marines, 3 Dreadnoughts as a single choice. You can have 5 Mechanicum robots, 3 enormous Mechanicum robots, 10 Custodians. They're big units, and that allows you to scale the lists up to, you can certainly scale them up to around the 6,000 points mark, just using the army list, although arguably at that point you're better off playing Apocalypse. So yeah, so big, medium to big games. But I think from experience it plays fine around the 2,000 point game. And you can play smaller, you know, and don't let your imaginations inhibit you there. You can play smaller games, but it does, particularly with the Marine Legions, you want around 2,000 points upwards, because otherwise you can be a bit inflexible. As well as big units, they're specialised units. So Space Marine Legions in particular, and this is probably true of most of the units, the units are very specialised. So Tactical Marines only carry bolt guns. Your heavy support squads, every trooper carries a heavy weapon. Your tactical support squads is 5 to 10 Marines all armed with flamers or melter guns, for example. And that theme carries through a lot of the armies as well. There are variations and there are more flexible units. There is that theme of big specialised units, and that means there's a lot of firepower in the Heresy. It's certainly the games are more shooty than in 40k, I think, if that's a technical term, shooty. And there is a lot of weapons that are not present in 40k that are present in 30k, and these tend to be range weapons, and they tend to be harder hitting, faster firing, so on and so forth. So the firepower in the Heresy is greater than in 40k. So that's not to say there aren't deadly melee units, because there are, but I would say it's more of a shooting game. As well as all those big troops and units, you've got lots of vehicles, and this is where equally as well you get all the specialised esoteric tech that you don't get in 40k. If you look at the options available to the Marines, there's all sorts of fantastically sophisticated tanks that you can't get in 40k. Mechanicum have got an array of incredibly deadly battle robots, battle automata, that you can't get in 40k. The Solar Auxilia have got the best dedicated transport in pretty much the whole of 40k. There's all sorts of great stuff like that. So if you like your fancy kit, the Horus Heresy is a good place for you. And you could say the Mechanicum have got robots, more robots, cyborgs. You get the tech priests, so the Myrmidon cults, and you also get a whole range of weird and wonderful Mechanicum tanks as well. I think at this point it's worth just thinking about a little bit about the game style in 30k. If you played first or second edition of Warhammer 40,000, do you remember the army lists of that era? And if you remember the army lists in the style of Slaves to Darkness and Warhammer 40,000 Compendium, and to a lesser degree Lost and the Damned, that sort of era of army list, the Horus Heresy, for me, really harks back to that. And it's an age when you could put together really large infantry forces with lots of tanks. If you want to fight big, it's like that. But the style of the forces, it also, I don't know, just thematically feels like that era, that style as well. And I guess another thing to think about is, for me, heroes are much more mortal and less significant in a way in the Horus Heresy. That's not to say there aren't a lot of good heroes, because there are some great heroes. However, I think they play less of a role in general than they do in 40k. So it makes a game more around the overall army, I think, rather than one super powerful hero. Now, of course, there's an exception to that, because you have the Primarchs available, which are just the most crazy combat individuals you can imagine. However, they are Lords of War, so they are balanced that way, or the accessibility to them is balanced. Oh, right, let me go back to going through what the armies are like. So I've talked about the Legions, Mechanicum, Solar Auxilia. I mean, yeah, it's supercharged Imperial Guard, all in carapace void armor. They've got some great vehicles available to them. The militia lists are kind of like Imperial Guard, but downgraded a bit. However, because of the provenances of war for the militia and the cults, you can either lift them up or you can sideways shift them into the cultist style list, so they're very flexible. The Questoris Knights, well, how many knights do you want in a force? And you've got access to all the sophisticated Cerastus variant chassis knights as well. And then you've got the Shattered Legion and the Black Shields as well, which allow you to create, shall we say, off-the-wall Space Marine armies, or Space Marine armies where you've got maybe 3 or 4 different Legions forces all together, and then the Black Shields, which are just something completely different and a bit more like maybe Chaos Renegades perhaps. And then finally you've got the Talons of the Emperor, which the Talons of the Emperor give you the highest quality troops ever portrayed in Warhammer 40,000 as an average, because the Custodian Guard are incredibly high quality troops. And then you also have alongside those the Sisters of Silence, which anyone who likes the Adeptus Sororitas is probably going to like them, but they're also something else as well, because they are the most formidable anti-psyker army ever introduced into a 40k game. And they've got a whole load of very specialised abilities there as well, and unique capabilities. So there's something in their own right as well. So yeah, the Talons of the Emperor are a new and fascinating force. And I guess as well, I suppose, if you want really, really high-tech human forces, so golden age of technology type sophistication, or dark age of technology, depending on what you want to call it, the Talons of the Emperor bring equipment and troop quality of that order. So that's game style. That gives you a bit of a flavour for what the games are like. I mean, obviously you play normal scenarios or whatever you want to make up to play, but yeah, very different flavour to the army lists, the tactical play, and the unit types, and the balance of shooting and melee. So that brings me to the final part of this overview, which is, well, where do you start? That's a tricky question. And I suppose it depends what you're interested in. If you're interested in the lore alone, then the Black Books are the place to go. And I would say you could buy any Black Book and they all read well as a standalone thing. If you want to follow the sequence of the story, then book one's a great, is a logical place to start and follow it through. But equally, you could pick up book 7, which is a prequel, Inferno. You could pick up book 7 and start on that. In the same way, if you're just interested in the events around the Battle of Calth and the fight between the Ultramarines and the Wordbearers, you could pick up book 5. If you're interested in playing the wider scale heresy, then book 6, Retribution. I would say go look at what each of those books has got in them, and find the bit of the lore that interests you and go for it. Right, if you're a gamer, it's a bit different though. I think again, if there's a specific part of the heresy that you want to play, then the Black Books are great resources that can really bring that to life for you. If you're just wanting to game and very much focus on the game, then you can get into it. You've got a copy of 40k rules and get into it with just one of these red books, which is a good way of doing it. Maybe 2 if you're playing the Legion. So that's a more inexpensive way of starting out in the heresy. What I would do, go and read about the books, see if there's something that interests you in the story arc, and start there and get the Black Book around that. Or if you're interested in a particular force, and get the Crusade Army List to go with it. And yeah, as I said, in terms of starting with the miniatures, well, depending on what your budget's like, if you're looking to spend something and you want the lowest cost way of doing it, then those 2 box sets, Calth and Prospero, or Prospero, depending on what your inflection is, great places to start. If you've got the money to spend on the resin, the world's your oyster with the Forge World range. And Forge World, from time to time, they have bundles available of their resin models, which do lower the cost a bit. For example, there's a Mechanicum bundle available at the moment, I think. Obviously, you're shelling out a few £100s to get it, but you are paying less than buying all the models individually. There are some combined sets as well, with Games Workshop plastic models and Forge World upgrade components as well. So a way of, if you're wanting some resin and plastic components, you can build up Legion forces that way. And then if you also like the resin models, there is I think it's a Mark IV tactical squad pack, which gives you 30 resin Mark IV Marines with accessories. And I think it's about £170, and it's about a discount of £20 on the retail, so it costs £190 normal. So that's another option as well. But it all depends what your budget is. But your lowest cost route in is Betrayal at Calth and Burning of Prospero box sets. So I think that wraps up my introduction to the Horus Heresy. I hope you found that interesting and informative, and if you're looking to start, I hope there's some advice in there that might help you out. If you've got any questions, please do leave them in the comments, and I'll do my best to answer those. I really like the Horus Heresy, and I really like the direction it's taken the whole 40k in. It's breathed a breath of fresh air into the whole thing, and it's created a very distinct part of the game with a very specific style, which is different to the mainstream 40k. And I think that's a really positive thing, and for me, I really like that style. So yeah, I think it's a great thing. You'll probably guess that from all the stuff I do about it. Anyway, thank you ever so much for watching. I'll speak to you next time, and goodbye.